Disclaimer: this story is based on urban legends and unverified. While Charles Bronson was known to walk city streets alone during Death Wish filming, the specific details of this encounter are dramatized for storytelling purposes. October, New York City, 11:43 p.m. The streets of Manhattan were a war zone. Crime was out of control. Muggings happened every hour. Murder rates were at an all-time high. The city was bankrupt. Police were overwhelmed, and criminals operated with impunity. Into this chaos walked Charles Bronson, 54 years old, alone, walking from a film set to his hotel. He would just finished a night shoot for Death Wish. He was exhausted, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket, looking like any other tired man trying to get home. 3 men watched him from a darkened alley between 42nd and 43rd Street. They saw an older guy, alone, vulnerable, an easy target. They had no idea they would just chosen the wrong victim on the wrong night. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become one of the most repeated stories in New York City history. A story that blurred the line between Charles Bronson, the actor, and Paul Kersey, the character. A story that made criminals check twice before approaching anyone on the street. This is the legend of the night. Charles Bronson was mugged, or more accurately, the night someone tried to mug Charles Bronson. To understand why this incident became legendary, you need to understand New York City in October 1976. President Ford had just refused to bail out the city from bankruptcy. The Daily News ran the famous headline, "Ford to City, Drop Dead." Essential services were cut, garbage piled up on streets, police and fire departments were understaffed, and crime filled the vacuum. Muggings were not occasional occurrences. They were routine. If you walked alone at night in Manhattan, you were going to get mugged. It was a matter of when, not if. Charles Bronson had been filming Death Wish throughout September and October. The film was a response to exactly this crisis: urban crime, citizen fear, the sense that civilization was collapsing and nobody could stop it. Death Wish's premise, that an ordinary man could fight back against criminals, resonated because New Yorkers felt helpless. They wanted someone to fight back. They wanted Paul Kersey to be real. And in a strange way, that is exactly what they got that October night. Charles had a habit that worried his security team and frustrated his director. He walked the streets alone at night. Not in safe neighborhoods. In the dangerous ones, Times Square, Hell's Kitchen, the Lower East Side, places where even police patrolled in pairs. When people asked why he did this, Charles would say, "I need to understand the fear. Paul Kersey is an architect who does not know these streets. I need to feel what he feels when he starts walking them." But there was more to it than method acting. Charles had grown up in poverty. He would survive the coal mines and World War II. He was not afraid of street criminals, or if he was, he did not let fear stop him. October 27th, 1976. Charles finished a night shoot at 11:30 p.m. The scene was a subway sequence where Paul Kersey shoots 2 muggers who attack him. After hours of filming simulated violence, Charles was tired. His hotel was 12 blocks away. His driver had already left, assuming Charles would catch a ride with the director, but Charles preferred to walk. He told the assistant director he would see everyone tomorrow and stepped into the night. The route from the film set to Charles's hotel took him through one of the worst areas in Manhattan. Prostitutes worked the corners. Drug dealers operated openly. Homeless people huddled in doorways, and predators watched for victims. Charles walked with his hands in his jacket pockets, head slightly down, looking like someone who wanted to be invisible. But invisibility in 1970s Manhattan did not mean safety. It meant you looked like prey. 3 men were standing in an alley between 42nd and 43rd Street. Let us call them Suspect A, Suspect B, and Suspect C, since we do not know their real names, and they were never arrested. Suspect A was the leader, early 20s, history of armed robbery. Suspect B and C were muscle, both teenagers, both desperate for money to feed addictions. They would been working that corner for weeks, robbing anyone who walked by alone. They would perfected the ambush, wait until the target passes the alley, step out behind him, show a weapon, demand money and jewelry, disappear into the alley before anyone can react. Charles Bronson walked past their alley. Suspect A signaled to the others. They stepped out onto the sidewalk behind Charles. Suspect A pulled a knife, a 6-inch blade. Suspect B had a lead pipe. Suspect C blocked the alley exit. Standard mugging formation. Charles kept walking. He would heard them step onto the sidewalk. The footsteps were too deliberate, too close. He knew what was coming. But he did not run. He did not speed up. He just kept walking at the same pace. "Hey!" Suspect A's voice cut through the night. Charles stopped walking. He turned slowly, hands still in his jacket pockets. The 3 men stood 6 feet behind him, spread out in a semicircle. Suspect A held the knife visible, blade catching the streetlight. "You know what this is, old man," Suspect A said. Charles looked at the knife, then at the pipe, then at Suspect A's face. He did not speak, just looked. And something in that look made Suspect A hesitate. It was not fear in the old man's eyes. It was not even anger, just a cold, evaluating stare, like Charles was calculating odds. "Give us your wallet," Suspect A continued, trying to sound in control. "Watch too, and do not try anything stupid." Charles still did not speak. He just stood there, completely still, hands in pockets, staring. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It was unnatural. Victims were supposed to panic, plead, hand over their possessions immediately, but Charles did none of those things. He just stared. And in that stare, Suspect A saw something that made his stomach drop. This was not an easy victim. This was someone who would seen violence before, real violence, not street corner bravado. Suspect B, getting nervous, stepped forward with the pipe. "You deaf, old man," he said. "Ik faps," and then Suspect B stopped mid-sentence. Because he had gotten close enough to see Charles's face clearly under the streetlight, and he recognized him. "Holy shit," Suspect B whispered. "That is him. That is fucking Paul Kersey." Suspect A glanced at Suspect B. "What? Death Wish Man? That is the guy from the movie. That is Charles Bronson." Now here is where the story gets interesting and where truth blurs with legend. According to the most popular version of this story, what happened next depends on who is telling it. Some versions say Charles smiled. Some say he pulled his hands from his pockets, revealing nothing but empty hands, but the gesture was enough. Some say he spoke one sentence, "You sure you want to do this?" What everyone agrees on is that the 3 muggers ran, not walked away, ran, disappeared into the alley, and never looked back. But there is another version of the story, less well known, but repeated by people who claimed to be nearby that night. In this version, Charles did not smile or speak. Instead, he took one step forward, just one step, toward 3 armed men, and that single step, that absolute lack of fear, broke something in the mugger's confidence. Because if you are trying to rob someone, and they step toward you instead of away from you, one of 2 things is true. Either they are crazy, or they are more dangerous than you are. Either way, you have made a mistake. Suspect A, knife still in hand, backed up a step. Man, I do not want this. This is crazy. Suspect B was already in the alley. Let's go. Let us just go. Suspect C, who had not recognized Charles, looked confused. What the hell are you doing? There is 3 of us. But Suspect A was already backing away. You do not understand. That is Charles Bronson. That is the Death Wish guy. So what? It is a movie. Just move. And they ran. All 3 of them disappeared into the darkness of the alley, leaving Charles standing alone on the sidewalk. Charles watched them go. Then he turned and continued walking to his hotel. According to people who claim to have seen this, Charles's expression never changed. He did not look relieved or scared or victorious. He just looked like a man walking home after a long day of work. The story of Charles Bronson's mugging, or attempted mugging, spread through New York City like wildfire. By the next morning, it was being told in diners and bars across Manhattan. By the end of the week, it had reached every borough. By the end of the month, it had become legend. The details changed with each telling. Some versions had Charles actually fighting the muggers and beating them unconscious. Some had him pulling a gun. Some had him delivering a speech about justice and criminals. But the core of the story remained the same. Charles Bronson, the actor who played a vigilante, had been targeted by real criminals and they would run away. Life had imitated art in the most perfect way possible. Did it really happen? That is the question everyone asks about this story. And the honest answer is, we do not know for certain. Charles Bronson never confirmed or denied it publicly. When reporters asked him about the incident, he would smile slightly and say, I do not talk about things that may or may not have happened on the street. Which, of course, only made people believe it more, because if it had not happened, why not just deny it? But there are compelling reasons to believe some version of this story is true. First, multiple people over the years claimed to have witnessed it or heard about it directly from the participants. Second, Charles really did walk New York streets alone during Death Wish filming, against his security team's advice. Third, the incident fits perfectly with what we know about Charles's character. He would survive the coal mines and World War II. Street criminals did not frighten him. And fourth, the NYPD has records of several reported incidents during October 1976, where potential mugging victims scared off attackers, though none specifically mentioned Charles Bronson by name. Here is what we do know for certain. In late October 1976, street criminals in New York began telling each other to watch for Charles Bronson, not because he was likely to be carrying large amounts of cash, but because word had spread that he was not an easy target. Whether that word spread because of one specific incident or multiple encounters, the result was the same. Charles Bronson became an urban legend, a man criminals avoided, not because of what he would done, but because of what he represented. The incident, or incidents, had a strange cultural impact. Death Wish was already controversial. Critics hated it, calling it fascist vigilante porn, but audiences loved it, seeing it as catharsis for their urban fears. When the story spread that Charles Bronson had actually scared off real muggers, it blurred the line between fiction and reality in a way that made both critics and supporters uncomfortable. Was Charles Bronson promoting vigilantism just by existing? Was his presence on New York streets form of prime deterrence? It was absurd to think that way, but people did anyway. Some New Yorkers started calling Charles Bronson the city's unofficial guardian. They joked that he should be given an honorary police badge. They claimed crime rates dropped in neighborhoods where he was filming. None of this was verifiable, but it spoke to how desperate people were for someone, anyone, to make them feel safe. Charles Bronson had become a symbol, not just an actor, but a representation of resistance against chaos. Charles himself was ambivalent about this legend. On one hand, he understood that people needed heroes, needed to believe that someone was fighting back. On the other hand, he worried about the implications. In a 1977 interview, shortly after Death Wish's success, Charles said, "People confuse me with Paul Kersey. They think I am actually a vigilante, but I am an actor. I play characters. What those characters do is not what I do, and I worry that people will take the wrong lessons from these films. Violence is not a solution. It is a failure of all other solutions." But the legend persisted. Throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s, variations of the mugging story circulated. Some had Charles fighting off multiple attackers. Some had him saving other victims from criminals. One particularly wild version claimed he would disarm a gunman on the subway and handed the weapon to police. None of these elaborated versions were verified, but they all served the same psychological need. The need to believe that good could triumph over evil, that courage could defeat fear, that one man could make a difference. The truth, as always, is probably less dramatic than the legend, but no less interesting. Charles Bronson walked dangerous streets during a dangerous time. He was not looking for trouble, but he was not afraid of it either. And whether through one specific incident or multiple small encounters, he earned a reputation among New York's criminal element as someone to avoid. That reputation saved him from further incidents and contributed to the mythology that surrounded him. Here is what makes the Charles Bronson mugging legend important. It shows how desperately people wanted vigilante justice to be real. Death Wish resonated not because audiences were bloodthirsty, but because they felt abandoned by the systems supposed to protect them. Police could not stop crime. Courts could not prosecute effectively. Politicians could not fix the problems. So people created their own hero. They took Charles Bronson, an actor playing a character, and turned him into something more, a real-world protector, a symbol that resistance was possible. Did Charles Bronson really scare off 3 muggers in October 1976? Maybe, probably. The evidence suggests something happened that matched the legend's basic framework. But the specific details have been lost to time, embellished by repetition, transformed into myth, and maybe that is appropriate. Because the legend of Charles Bronson's mugging was never really about what happened in 60 seconds on a Manhattan street. It was about what people needed to believe could happen. That evil could be faced, that fear could be overcome, that one man, armed with nothing but presence and courage, could make criminals think twice. The legacy of the Charles Bronson mugging legend extends beyond the 1970s. It influenced how we think about crime, self-defense, and urban survival. It contributed to debates about vigilantism that continue today. And it cemented Charles Bronson's status, not just as an actor, but as a cultural icon who represented something primal and powerful, the refusal to be a victim. Whether the incident happened exactly as the legend describes does not matter as much as the fact that people believed it could have happened because they would seen Charles Bronson on screen. They would seen the cold stare, the calm demeanor, the absolute absence of fear, and they believed that effect info could walk through the worst streets of New York City and come out untouched. It was him. So the next time you hear someone tell the story of the night Charles Bronson was mugged, remember this: legends are built on truths too powerful to be contained by facts. And sometimes the legend tells us more about who we are and what we need than the truth ever could.